Hello everyone. So today, as promised in an earlier segment, we are going to go more in depth into the hoof. So we did a grooming demo a few weeks ago where we talked about grooming the horse and we said that we would later focus on the hoof. And we did this separately because the hoof is a very involved, we could talk about it for a long time, the anatomy of it, picking it out properly, and the upkeep of a hoof. So we're going to focus a little bit on that today. So we're going to start with talking about what the hoof, the underside of the hoof is made of, and the different anatomy. And I'm going to be sending this handout to you, but I want you to follow along. And this is just some basic anatomy. This is in no way the entire anatomy of the foot. We could focus on that for a whole day, and we will, not a whole day. But we will go more in depth into this later. But for the purpose of learning how to pick out their feet, this is just a sheet about their basic hoof anatomy. And as you follow along today, I want you to draw a line from the part of the hoof to the hoof here. So I'm going to pass this off to Molly, and you will get a copy of that. So the hoof is so important because if you think about it, it's such a small thing that holds up this giant creature. And in reality, if you don't have a good, solid, well taken care of hoof, then you don't have a horse. You certainly don't have a horse to ride. A good way of thinking about it is if one of your legs was shorter than the other, you would develop pain starting from your legs all the way up through your whole body. And it's the same thing with a horse. If the horse's feet are not taken care of, if they're trimmed unevenly, if they're not picked out, then your horse is going to develop major health issues that affect you from doing anything with them ever again, whether it's riding or just their basic health of being a horse and being alive. So, it seems like a small thing, but taking care of their hooves is very important. So if you want to come a little closer, I'm going to first show you the anatomy of Sally's foot, and we are going to go into picking and how to properly pick it up in a minute. So I'm going to just pick it up so you can see. I chose this one because it's relatively clean. Let me just get this dirt out for you. So it looks a lot like that diagram you have on your sheet there. So we're going to start with this here. This sort of V-shaped area is called the frog. And it is super sensitive to where if you picked it, it would hurt. And it kind of acts as a shock absorber. So, and she has one of these on each one of her hooves. And behind the frog here is her heel. And each sort of spot here is a heel bulb. So these are also a little sensitive area. They sort of absorb the shock as they run. And then you see this area that kind of surrounds the frog. This is the sole, and it's made of keratin. It doesn't grow quite as quickly as the keratin on the outside of her hoof that we're going to get to in a second, but the sole also absorbs that shock as they move around, and it's sort of concave, so the sole isn't usually hitting the ground. It sort of helps distribute that weight evenly all around their hoof. And then the other side, let's see, I don't know if you can, how easily you can see this. You can see it better when we set their hoof down. This is the hoof wall, and this is that part of the hoof that is constantly growing and needs to be trimmed. It houses all of the hoof, and it's made out of keratin, which is the same material that our fingernails are made out of. And it either needs to be trimmed at least usually every 5 or 6 weeks. Sally's is done every 5 weeks. And as you can see, which we will get into soon, Sally isn't wearing any horseshoes. She goes barefoot. And Miss Molly, was there any other anatomy part on that sheet that I'm missing? Frog, wall, heel, sole, toe. Okay, so the last part is the toe. which is just like our toe right on the front of her foot here. And it's kind of tied into the hoof wall. And it's really important to keep the toe nice and trimmed because, like I said, the hoof is constantly growing. And if those toes get too long, then she could actually be tripping whenever she walks, which can pose a real safety hazard to her, whether it's out in the field or when one of us is riding her. So you can kind of see now that her feet are down the hoof wall a little bit better. So they're usually white or black. Hers has some mixed color in there. And that part of the hoof is not sensitive, which is why it does not hurt when we trim them. All right, so keeping those anatomy parts in mind, I'm going to show you how we pick her hoof. And I'm going to have you come around the other side with me because her feet over here were not that dirty. So sometimes picking the hooves is intimidating. They are big animals, but I like to assure everyone that they're very used to having their feet taken care of. It's very important that if they work here that they need to be respectful about picking up their feet. That's not to say, though, that they won't give us a little challenge when we try to pick up their feet. We always encourage everyone that if they try to put their foot down when you're holding it, kind of keep holding it tight because that'll show them that they're not going to win that battle and they need to listen when you're holding up their foot. So when you pick the front feet or the back feet, they are done a little bit differently whether you're in the front or the back, but you always want to be facing the tail. So if you're standing, I'm standing on Sally's right side, and I'm going to be using my right arm to kind of run down and put some pressure on her leg. And as I'm putting pressure, I'm also going to lift. Now you'll notice if I'm holding her leg like this, she doesn't feel any support under here, and it's going to be harder to pick. So what I do is I then come under her foot and hold it like that, so she feels more supported and she's less likely to try and put her foot down, which is what she's currently trying to do. You notice how I'm going to hold on to it until she settles. And then we talked about the frog a minute ago, and you can see on this hoof, she has some dirt really built up into her frog. And that's where most often rocks and mud collect. So you don't want to pick directly on the frog. You want to pick down these grooves here. And it does not hurt her. She's just getting impatient. So you pick out these areas, and then you kind of go around the edge too and get out any other dirt or rocks that you find. You can see she had a rock there that we got out. We have a lot of gravel around here, so the horses are walking on gravel fairly often. Okay, and then once you have all the major dirt and rocks out, that's when you take this other side of the hoof pick and kind of brush it all out. I see it's a little bit more in there. You got a lot of rocks in your foot, girl. Good, and it doesn't usually take that long, so it's also important that when you're holding her hoof, you don't want to have your foot underneath of hers. You always want to be standing off to the side. And when you set that hoof down, you don't want to just slam it down. You kind of want to lower it down with her. Okay, so I'm going to move to this hind leg here. I'm going to walk alongside of her. I'm not going to stand behind her. I'm going to continue standing on the side, facing the back of her, facing her tail. And with the hind leg, it gets a little challenging because they carry more weight in their hind end. So it's heavier. It's a little bit more strenuous to hold up their hind leg sometimes. Some of our horses tend to relax while you're holding their hind leg and just sort of say, I'm going to take a nap now, hold me up. We want to, don't let them do that to you. They are capable of, supporting their other weight on their three legs. But a lot of times the other thing that we see is when you pick up their hind foot, they like to stretch it up really high first, and then they sort of relax down. So what we want you to do is when you pick up that hind foot, wait while you're holding it until they relax it down, and then you can pick it. So I'm going to pick up her hind leg. I sort of put pressure on the leg as I'm running down her leg. And once again, if you hold it here, that's not enough support. Now what we don't like is if you put your arm like this when you're picking her foot, if she were to kick it a fly or kick out, your arm is locked up against the back of her foot and that you could hurt your forearm. So what we want is for you to come around and support her hoof like so. And her hoof back here is not nearly as dirty as that other one, but we're going to pick around the frog and brush out any dirt. And then we're going to set it down gently, make sure our feet aren't underneath of her hoof. And of course we need to pick all 4 hooves, but for the sake of time, we're not going to pick every single one. You want to make sure you go in some sort of order. So, you would go front, back, back, front. So she can kind of predict where you're going to go next, and she's more likely to help you out there by lifting up her foot. So that's just the basics of picking a hoof and the basic horse anatomy. We have a really cool video in the next segment for you where you're going to get to see a little bit of our farrier working on some of our horses. So stay tuned for that segment.